Imagine surrounding yourself with incredible women who've overcome challenges, they've rebounded after failures and disappointments, and women who are not afraid to shine their brilliance to make a mark in the world. These women support other like-minded women because they know there is plenty of opportunity for everyone and that together we really can make a difference, grow our businesses while have fun along the way. This is what Women in Leadership Podcast is all about. Welcome. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Grab a cuppa of your favourite beverage, pull up a chair and let's get this conversation started. And welcome back to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast. Joining me today is Marsha Acker. Marsha, she is the founder and the CEO of TeamCatapult, which is a leading leadership development firm that has 28 plus years of experience. Marsha is an internationally recognized for her expertise in facilitating meaningful conversations, breaking through communication barriers, as well as promoting agility across organizations. She's also the host of Defining Moments of Leadership podcast, the author of The Art and Science of Facilitation, and Build Your Model for Leading Change. She emphasizes the importance of facilitation and coaching skills as essential for 21st century leaders. I totally agree. Now, on today's show, Marsha is going to share how leading change, that often means that we can get stuck and have the same conversations over and over again without getting anywhere. I'm sure many of us can recognize that. She's going to talk about how deepening your self-awareness to understand your impact on interpersonal and group dynamics, that's going to make an impact, as well as 4 primary questions to ask when leading change. Hope you've got your pens and paper ready because this is going to be a wonderful conversation. Welcome, Marsha.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. It's nice to be here.
Tell me, we mentioned in the introduction that you've got 28 plus years of experience. If you were to give a snapshot, what were some of the things that led you down the path today? Because you're obviously very passionate about leadership, facilitating change, and my goodness, don't we need that in the world today?
I could sum it up really succinctly and say, I think what led me here is that I wish I had the skills that I believe in now in my early career. So I, started my career in the space of technology. I had 2 degrees in software engineering. And I think what I see the most, I saw it in myself, it's certainly part of my journey, is getting really good at expertise in a particular area. So I think we all do that. I think we all have areas that that we have a great deal of expertise in. And then as we move up, the needs and the requirements of those around us change. And I think what got us to where we are won't take us to the next level. I often say, I talk with the leaders that I talk with, I say, you're really good at what you do. You're really good at technical expertise, and we're really good at helping you work with other humans. So I just think that we don't inherently, I think there's 2 challenges. I don't think we inherently have really good skills for working with other humans and communicating with other humans. And I think it's not necessarily a thing that we focus on our practice. Because I
Yes.
think we believe that because we communicate all day, every day, right? So I just think we believe that we do it well already.
It's interesting that you should say that, because when we look at leadership skills, or we think about the leaders that we admired, that we respected, versus those that perhaps we don't as much, we realize that there is an attitude and an approach that they have that just enables to get the best out of their team, the ability to manage and handle situations no matter what's going on, and you feel safe, in their in their surrounding areas, versus you might not know what the leader is going to do depending on what mood that they're in. And as you said, it's not until you get really skilled in, or we see someone getting really skilled in an area of expertise, we think, well, they would be a really great leader. But
Yeah.
all of the skills required to, as you said, interact and lead humans, other humans in the workplace and stakeholders in the organization and greater. That's not nothing we don't really focus on. I mean,
Mm.
even in schools,
Yeah.
young children should be taught a lot of these skills. What do you think about that? Let's unpack that a little bit.
Oh my gosh. I have a 15-year-old daughter. I often tell a lot of stories about my daughter and I, just because from the time she was born, she's teaching me all about myself, about how I communicate. My daughter and I have stuck patterns, where we have the same conversations over and over again. We have stuck patterns in our family where we have the same conversation over and over again. And I think one of the things that I will not have been perfect in any of this, as no parent is, but I
Mm.
often say to her, I hope one thing that I'm giving you is maybe the ability to be able to focus on how you're communicating, and being able to notice patterns. And I couldn't agree with you more. I wish we started this kind of training in grade school. It
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
really lovely.
Yeah, I noticed, so we've got a 3.5-year-old grandson, and he comes over regularly. And he's going through the stage of
Yeah.
why? And I won't say who in our family, but, someone in the family says, "Because I told you so."
Yeah.
And I look at that young child, and he's born around the similar month as I am, and I'm thinking to myself, that answer just would not respond to me. I would just continue to ask. And so it is, we follow why,
Yeah.
and we're actually educating. We're actually providing information for him to go, "Oh, well, that makes sense."
Mhm.
And that is just one form of communication skills that we kind of think, well, we may have seen that in the olden days, where we were told you need to do exactly and
Yeah.
whatever your elders tell you to do. But I thought that was quite funny because, you're talking about your daughter, because the skills and things that we're talking about, we may talk about within the context of business and leadership in the workplace. But my goodness, we can use those skills, can't we,
Oh,
within any situation to become
all
far more influential.
all across. Actually, Emery, one of the things that you've just said, I think gets laid down for all of us really early on, which is that, if I have a question, and I'm asking why, and yes, 3-year-olds I think are the perfection of the why question. And a lot of times, if we, kind of run out of answers, or we run out of time sometimes to provide the answer, and so we do say that thing, well, because I said so. And I watch leaders do it as well. You want change to happen, and you try some tactics to involve other people. You maybe watch what other leaders are doing, or you've been led before and you've seen examples of other people doing it, and yet you find yourself in a high stakes moment, and people are resisting. They won't, they won't join you, or you're finding, it feels like you're pulling people along. And then all of a sudden we just default to that phrase. It's like, well, because I told you so. At the end of the day, like, I need you to just go along to get along. And I do think sometimes, whether we intend to or not, we can default to that when we're trying to bring about change. And I think the reality is that for many of us, sometimes, even though, if I'm really honest, I've likely thought that myself at some point. Like,
Mhm.
can we just, can you just say yes, and and come along? Um, but there's really, I think, a lot more technique, and
Mm,
we teach leaders sort of a model for looking at how to break down communication and understand the patterns in the way
mm,
we're communicating. And the intent is really for, to involve people in that process, and
mhm,
really watch about how we're communicating with them. And I think that the way we communicate, like how we show up in those conversations, and the intersection of, who we are as individuals and who we are as a group, I think that's where all change starts from. And the success
mm,
either propels us forward, or it sort of holds us back in what we're seeing.
mm. So if we find that we have gotten ourselves into a pattern where the
Mm,
conversation, particularly about a specific, I don't know, change or something, is over and over again, and they're not really getting anywhere. What
yeah.
are a couple of tips that you could share in
Mm,
this area to help shift through that so that at least we can start moving forward rather than remaining in that pattern of
yeah.
stuckness?
Well, I think a lot of times it really starts with us first. So I'll give you examples. So we're talking about kids, and I think sometimes that's an easy example to give because many of us have them in our lives in some way or another. But when my daughter was really young, she and I had a stuck conversation, and I called it the "Get your shoes on, please"
Mm,
conversation, and we'd have this conversation anytime we were getting ready to go somewhere that she didn't want to go. And so I would say to her, "Lauren, do you have your shoes on?" And she'd say, "No." So I'd say, "Great, bus is leaving, bus will be here in 10 minutes. I need you to get your shoes on." So, walk away 5 minutes later. "Do you have your shoes on?" "No." "What are you doing?" And she'd say, I'm playing. I need you to get your shoes on." And she'd say, "Okay." And that's actually what she would have said the first time I'd asked her. So I say, "I need you to get your shoes on." She says, "Okay." And I come back, and of course, the bus is here, and I turn to her and say, "Let's go." And then I find a toddler sitting on the floor screaming because she doesn't have her shoes on. And we had like this stuck conversation. So, one of the technologies that we give to leaders to just sort of make sense of communication comes from David Cantor, and it's called structural dynamics. And it's a way of actually coding everything that we say could actually be coded into one of four actions. We're either, in our sentences, we're either setting direction with a move, we're following or supporting with a follow, we're opposing, offering correction, or we're offering a bystand, which is actually a morally neutral comment. So what was happening with Lauren is I'd make a move and say, "I need you to get your shoes on." And she would follow by saying, "Okay."
mhm,
But what she intended was a no. She
mm,
intended an oppose. And so in that very moment, I'm making a move. She's making a follow, but she intends something entirely different than what she's voicing. And instead of saying, "I don't want to," maybe she thought she couldn't say that to me or it wouldn't have been welcomed. But in any case, we got stuck in this pattern where she was doing something that was different than what she was saying. And I
mm,
think that happened. That is the crux of what happens to so many of us. We intend one thing, but we do something else for all
yeah.
kinds of reasons. And then it creates confusion or misunderstanding or stuckness in the
Mhm,
conversation. We find ourselves repeating it. So, in that example, after I started to realize that we were in that pattern, I just started to change how I entered the conversation. So, she's a pretty independent individual, even at that age, and certainly now. And
yeah.
so it wasn't helpful for her when I kept making moves. Even as a
Mhm,
teenager, like if I find myself constantly making moves, I will get the same pattern 15 years later. So, what I started to do in that conversation was just change the way I entered it. And so I would say to her something like, I would make a bystand and say, "I noticed the bus will be here in 10 minutes. What do you need to do in order to get ready?" And eventually she'd be able to say, "I think I need to put my shoes on." And then I
mm,
could follow her move. So I just give that to you as a really tiny
mm,
small example because I think it's in our patterns of communication that sometimes lead to stuckness. And
mm.
so it can be helpful to sort them out.
Yeah, so good. That one of the things as you were sharing with your interaction with your young daughter, that's similar. One of the things that I do with my grandson, I know that he's a boy, and
Yeah.
competitiveness. So if I know that he needs to go upstairs because Dad's waiting for him to put him to
Mm.
bed, I might say something like, "I bet you who do you think's faster going up the stairs, you or Olma?" And then off he goes. He's already up the stairs before I can go and go, "Good job done."
Yeah.
So, but what you're saying is you're recognizing in your daughter, how you enter the conversation, and
Yeah.
you were able to enter the conversation in a way that you knew was going to, allow her to respond
Yeah.
in a way where she wasn't feeling that immediately you might say something, and then she might have been happy to put the shoes on, no
Yeah.
problems, but how you enter the conversation may have made her go, you know what, I'd just like to continue playing with my toys.
It
So,
has to be her idea.
yeah,
Um, and I think so the way I'll pull that forward into leadership teams
yeah,
and teams of any kind really, that same pattern of saying okay and really intending a no is one of the primary patterns I watch show up in leadership teams all the time
yeah.
because we get trained some way or another that it's impolite, rude, it would be disrespectful to actually
Mm,
push back or oppose, to really clearly oppose. And so, in some ways, I think we've trained it out of ourselves. And yet, part of the theory of structural dynamics is that we need all four of those actions to be voiced and active in the conversation in order for the conversation to be effective. And if they're
mhm,
not voiced or active, then there's something in the system that's actually holding us back from the
mm,
real conversation. So then what we get in our systems and our teams is the surface level, the
mhm,
polite, the things that I think I'm going to be rewarded for saying, not always the things that I really think. So
mhm,
I think that's one of our challenges in communication is just becoming more aware of what we're intending and does the intention match the action?
mm,
And are we listening, well enough to one another? And or are we kind of getting stuck in a way of communicating where we're making too many moves and we
mhm.
overwhelm people, or we're
Yes,
too, we're pushing back, but we're not also offering an idea or solution. So like a new move, if I'm gonna oppose what you've put on the table, I also need to put something forward. And
yes.
or we get really stuck in conflict, right? So we've got a move and an oppose in the conversation, and now we're debating,
Mm,
and what we really need is somebody or someone, some other person in the conversation to bring forward things about what are being discussed that they could support, like genuinely support, and
yes.
understand context. And so I find those patterns to be so prevalent in communication, and it's where teams get really bogged down.
Yeah, because as you're explaining that, I'm imagining an example. Say, for instance, a new technology was going to be rolled out, and you had some team members who were quite happy to do that, and others who were quite, pushing back.
Yeah,
Example that you gave around your daughter, which was to invite her to come to the conversation, and it may very well be that, isn't it? Because there's a reason why, and the team member may not necessarily be comfortable enough to share why. And so inviting them to
mm,
participate and to share, and creating an environment that is safe for them to do so would
yeah,
help you unpack, what do we need to do and support you with that will enable you to move forward and learn this new technology and implement it. You talked a bit about group dynamics, and you shared
mm,
also something around, you recognized the style of your daughter and her approach, which she responded well with. I'd imagine within a group dynamics in an environment at work or anywhere really, you've got to also have an understanding that just because two or
mm,
three more people might accept it, you might have two or three that don't. And so you need to be aware of not just yourself. We can talk about deepening self-awareness as well, but also
yeah,
having an awareness of your team and how best do they respond, and in what way do I have to enter the conversation. That's something that is very much important in that instance too, isn't
oh
it?
yeah. Absolutely. I totally agree. And one of the things that you're pointing to that I really think it's important for leaders to be cognizant of is
Mm.
what are they hearing from other people? So it's a little bit easier one-on-one because you might get to know, if you've got a colleague that you're close with or a co-founder, somebody that you work really close with, you can get to actually really know one another. That can actually be a trap too. You you can sort of fall into predictable patterns. But when you've got a team, you start to listen for who am I hearing from, who's voicing. Am I hearing opposition? Like, is there the voice of oppose that's coming out in our conversation? And if not, how can I prompt it? How can I invite it? So asking questions like, well, where might I be wrong, or where might we be missing something, or what's a con to the idea that's on the table? So actually, really genuinely, and I think you have to mean it when you invite it. But I think really genuinely seeking different points of view rather than trying to power through it quickly or
Mm,
I think so many times, certainly in the world of virtual, we can sort of toss a question out and then we get silence and then we sort of assume silence is consent and then we kind of skip forward. I think that's dangerous
mm.
because it really leaves the real conversation potentially offline.
Yeah. Also, sometimes you would imagine as leaders, as you said, sometimes they just want just do it, that kind
Right.
of thing. And that silence, I don't know if yeah, I'm sure you have the disc. You've got the
Mm,
extended disc now as well, and you have the people who are very steadfast. They will agree. However, because they don't like confrontation, but I
yeah.
tell you what, you might think that you've got their agreements, but they will go and express their concerns and all of that
Yeah.
to other people. Why I share this is, as a leader, you need to be all over whatever's going on, even
Mm,
behind the scenes,
mm,
because even if your team does do something and you've had to force them to do that, if you will, it's the underlying things that fester that will eventually impact the workplace. So ignoring that is not the best approach, is it? And you need to address that along the way, because somewhere something will happen if you don't address that within the workplace, because of impact and morale and all of that too. So leaders, you really need to be on top of this, don't you, what we're talking about today,
mm.
particularly with change and so forth going on.
Absolutely. I think that it's the sweeping it, stepping over, we call it stepping over it or sweeping it under
Yeah.
the rug that really builds up over time. And then it becomes much harder to unpack that. So I do think that slowing down for those micro moments is
Mm.
so much more beneficial, even when it seems like you just want to move forward.
Yes.
Like, can't we just keep going? And it doesn't mean I think that you'll do that every single time it happens.
Yeah.
I just think it's about paying attention to patterns. Like, how often do we do that? If we do it at every conversation and every meeting, we're really missing something.
Yeah. How important do you think it is for leaders to deepen their self-awareness?
Mm, I think it all starts there. And I know we talk about self-awareness a lot. I think it's certainly in a lot of leadership models. We talk about, becoming aware. And there's so many different ways that you can become aware. But if I had any advice for my younger self, it would be to pay way more attention to how I was showing up and why I did what I did.
Yeah.
Um, I think that it's the unpacking the why I do what I do and really coming to understand both its gifts and
Mm.
the place where it holds me back. And I
Yeah.
think that's true for all of us. But, it takes time. And I think, so I can say that I am, one of those people who likes to move things forward. I like to be at a certain pace. I like to work in a certain way. And I think I talk about, for all of us, it's about growing our range in leadership.
Mm.
So while I might prefer to move at a clip, that doesn't always serve me, and it certainly doesn't always serve the people that I'm working with and what we're trying to create together. And so I think there are places where I might want to move forward. I might even have this impulse or tendency to move forward. And I
Mm.
have found that the ability to sort of stretch myself and pause and go slower and find places, actually create space, create
Mm.
silence. And then certainly the skills of coaching and facilitation have helped me build that capacity. But I think that it really is something that we all as leaders need to find our own range. Like, it's
Mm.
not just about doing the things that we're comfortable with, but why are we comfortable with it? Why do we react to certain people when they communicate in a certain way? Um, why do our stakes rise, or why do we get sort of um, gristly with people or frustrated with certain people? What's that about? So I think all of that's just data for all of us.
Mm. That's so, so true. I think learning and gaining self-awareness is so important because, you know, you've recognized something in yourself. And so as leaders, if we're able to do that, there may be other things that we can put into place that will enable us to work the best that we can, because in an environment in which you work your best allows you to tap into all of those gifts and skills and strengths that
Yeah.
you have. And if you're working in an environment that is counter to that,
Mm,
um, there is nothing worse, you know, and we don't want to be rolling our eyes because someone's asking the question for the 10th time. You know, all of that can really impact the environment too. But then we can
yeah.
put other things into place that would mitigate those kind of things, you know, having another
Mm,
team member who, you know, can kind of be in a go-between. There's lots of different things I'm sure you work out with, the clients that you work with. But
yeah.
again, you can't decide on what those steps
Mm,
are unless each leader themselves, but also
yeah.
awareness of others as well. I
Yeah.
think is amazing. And I've heard time and time again, Marsha, of people who've come on the show, that when a team who works very closely together has not only self-awareness, but also
Mm,
awareness of others and the styles and preferences and things like that, there is such an appreciation, a deeper sense of
yeah.
appreciation for the team members, because it's not, oh, they're not just a pain because they ask a million and one questions or they need lots of information, rather than let's just make a decision, right here, right now. Oh, they
Yeah.
need time to process that. Okay, well, we'll make sure we do that in time. We can't do that unless we appreciate or understand how others prefer to work.
Mm.
Yeah.
David Cantor had a phrase that I love that sort of sits in the back of my mind often. But he said, "Do less harm and know the harm that you can do."
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that propels me forward in all the work that we do, is that I've worked for leaders who I would often describe as leaving a wake in their path. It wasn't fun to be part of that wake.
Mm,
And I think it's so easy, particularly in today's climate. There is no lack of change. Often change is happening externally, and we as leaders are having to respond and react. And um, when we are not in command of ourselves, meaning that we know ourselves deeply, we know what we do and why we do it, and
mhm,
we can notice when we encounter someone or we encounter a situation that just raises the stakes for us, it triggers us in some way, to be able to catch that and go, like, I know what's happening for me right now. It's this. And I know how to bring the stakes down. I know how to lower the stakes for myself so that I can just be more in command of my behavior. And I'm not showing up in a conversation, throwing things at people, raising my voice, telling people to get over it and move on. Like
yeah,
I think all of those behaviors, we've all done them. I think in many ways, shapes, and forms. I think leaders spend so much of their time in high stakes, anyways,
yeah.
leading today. So I think that's one of the values that sits behind that value of self
So true.
awareness.
I'm smiling on the inside, and it's probably coming out
Mm,
because I recall one of my colleagues, this was many, many years ago, and she started to learn more of self-awareness,
mm,
and the insight she'd say, "Oh, I would have treated my ex-husband so much differently," and, "Oh, I would have responded." And there was one time, I mean, the whole group of us, we just said, "That sounds like you." Yes, so she had a team member, I don't know how long the team member
mm.
had worked, but would come stick her head in the door. And, I don't know how many times this team member had done that. And she went to open the door, open her mouth. And my colleague said, "Now, just for a moment, just pretend that you have a brain in your head, use it to answer the question that you were just going to ask me, and close the door. I need to get this report done." She said, "I think I would have responded a little bit differently." But as you said, we've all been in situations
Yeah.
where we've said something, and the minute she did that, the door closed, she went out. She said, "Look, I am so sorry that I said that to you." But, yes, she could have done with some of that lower the stakes, just,
Yeah.
calm
Yeah.
down as you respond. So
Yeah.
so that was great, love that. So, yeah,
Mhm.
build self-awareness. If you haven't got that, let that be something that you do as a leader in 2024. And of course, at the end of the conversation, Marsha will share how people can connect with you. But before we finish up, I'd love to hear what are 4 primary questions that we can ask when leading change?
Mm. Well, I talk about, part of leading change is really about learning and getting really familiar with how we behave. So, the first question I call it really getting clear about your behavioral model. So, how do you behave today, and where did you learn to behave like that? And
Mm,
those are two parts of that question that really dive into self-awareness. So that's the first one. The second one is really around building your model for leadership. And the question prompt for that is, what kind of leader will you be?
mm,
The third one is, we have our behavior, we have how we show up in our work, in our leadership. And then what we sometimes really step over or leave out is how we will live. And it's
mm,
that personal side. And so that question prompt is, what does it mean for you to live a life worth living?
mm,
And it's really those three models, your model for living, your model for behavior, and your model for leading, that start to form this really rich intersection. I think about it as if you were to sit up in your chair or stand squarely with your feet on the floor, it is that solid ground of clarity that you come from when you start to lead. And I think it's those three things that help you answer that first question, that last question, which is, how will you lead change?
mm.
And that's what sort of informs the ground that we stand on as leaders. And so I think I don't think that we're ever done really answering those questions, but I think that many of us haven't really sat down to get clear about what our answers to those questions are first. And so it's that
Yes.
clarity and um, conviction, really,
Yeah.
about the intersection of all of those.
Mm. That first question you asked, I think, is incredible, because if it's
Mm,
a behavior that's not serving us, and asking, where did we get that from? We may be able to notice that it's a pattern that we're seeing, that we're living out, that may have been a pattern that we saw and thought, I really don't want to be like that at all. Yet for some
yeah.
reason we've picked that up. It allows us an opportunity to look at it then and make different changes around that. That,
Mm,
well, what do I need to do to no longer behave that way? Because as we know, as leaders, and particularly around change, and many of us are coaches and things, and coaches and mentors as well, we know that we can change. When our beliefs and values
mm,
change, that can impact our behavior. And guess
yeah,
what? When our behavior changes, that can impact our outcome. So
absolutely.
it's incredible opportunity for
Mm,
not only change, but transformational change,
yeah.
as an individual, and how we lead. We could even have gone, I think, in an hour, and just spoke on the 4 questions that you've just shared with us. But we've only just scratched the surface. Yet I know
Mm,
that it's been such a deep and rich conversation for people to take away with and ponder over, and look at, well, what needs to change for me as
mm,
I'm leading in 2024? Because ultimately, when you start making these changes, even small changes, you can start to see it filtering down in how our team approaches us, because some of those changes are instantly felt within an environment in your team. I'm sure that leaders who are working with you give you that feedback, that it's
yeah.
impacting positively the team as well. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it makes huge ripple impacts, because a lot of times it's not just that team that's doing the work, but it's how because it's how they show up. So they might be making adjustments to themselves in that intact team, but it ripples down across other
Yes.
teams. So
which is
It's
what
quite
leaders
impactful.
and ultimately a lot of the leaders above them are looking for. It impacts morale, it impacts productivity, which then in turn filters right down throughout the organization. So it is well worth the effort to implement. If people want to find out more, Marsha, about you and about your company, of course, how can they find out about Team Catapult? What's the best way to reach out?
So the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn at Marsha Acker. You can also find me at teamcatapult.com, and you can read about the book at buildyourmodel.com.
Fantastic. Well, look, thanks once again for coming on the show. Love the conversation today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Hey, it's Anne-Marie. Before I go, are you a coach or a consultant who feels like the world's best kept secret? Your experience is vast, yet secretly you're frustrated because despite all of your hard work, you're just not getting the visibility, the recognition, or new clients you'd hope for, and you don't know why? I've created a free resource that'll help you build visibility, generate leads, and enroll dream clients with ease because you're seen as a trusted authority, even in a crowded marketplace. And you've positioned yourself as the choice versus just a choice for your dream client. To get started, go to annemariecross.com/gift. That's annemariecross.com/gift.